Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the Not Working Crew Media's Learning to Craft Tabletop Terrain series. You'll be able to take these 4 basic shapes that you're going to learn how to cut today and turn them into something like this. Stick around. Wait a minute. I was so excited to get to today's show that I almost completely forgot. If you're new here, go ahead and click on that subscribe button. When that bell icon pops up, pound on that too. That's going to let you know anytime we put out a new video. So let's not wait any longer. Let's head on over to the workbench. See you there. First thing you're going to need is to grab a piece of foam, something that's kind of manageable. Now if you notice, this doesn't have any straight edges on it, but that's the first step that we need to do. So what you're going to do is you're going to grab some kind of straight edge. In my case, I'm going to use a carpenter square because I'm going to use that again later on. One of the tricks that you really need to try and get down is that you want to take off the least amount of material as possible, although for demonstration purposes, I'm going to take off more than I normally would. What I'm going to do is I'm going to line that up and I'm going to give myself a single straight edge line. Once I've got that marked, the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and pick up one of my metal rulers so I can go ahead and cut across this line. If you haven't seen my basics video on how to cut foam, I'm going to go ahead and link that here now. All you're going to do is take a new sharp razor blade, line your metal ruler up against it over the line you need to cut, score it, and cut through a few times at about a 45-degree angle. If your blade isn't long enough, you just extend the blade and continue to cut through across that line. Again, because this is a demonstration, I'm just going to go ahead and cut off a piece here so that you can see that we do have a good, clean, straight edge. The next thing you want to do is take your carpenter square, line it up against the clean edge that you just cut, and now, in order to get that 90-degree angle that we need, you go ahead and mark down along the edge of that carpenter square again. From here, we're pretty much just going to repeat the cutting process. Take a metal ruler, put it over where you need it, take your new blade, score it at about a 45-degree angle, and continue that process until you cut clean through. At this point, you should have a right angle. Take your carpenter square and check and make sure that you don't have any gaps on either side. I'm going to go ahead and flip over here to my Proxxon. If you don't have one of these tools and you're going to continue crafting, I would highly suggest that you get one. What I'm going to do, because I have the Proxxon, is set my depth here. I'm looking for a perfect 3 by 3 inch square. So along the compass that's built on top of the Proxxon, I'm going to take my straight edge and my ruler and mark out exactly 3 inches to where the hot wire is. Then I'm going to lock my fence down. For those that want to know, because I'm using 1/2 inch thick material, I'm going to set my Proxxon on about setting 4, and I'm going to line that right angle up against the fence. Put a little bit of pressure on the fence, and then I should be able to slide clean through in one pass. What I just did right there is now created a perfectly parallel line. Here's a little bit of a different view using one of my extra pieces of material that was a cutoff from the earlier demonstration. I do have a straight edge here and here, even though I am missing a little bit of a notch. This way you can see how that wire just makes quick work of that foam. And I can continue to cut this piece down until I get something that's perfectly square. Without moving that fence, I can take my parallel pieces here, or my piece that has the two parallel sides, and I can continue to cut through, and now I've got several 3x3 inch perfectly square tiles. This piece was a little bit thin, so just pull it off to the side so I can use it later on. One thing to be concerned about, if you're going to use these tiles and you're not going to use an interlock system, keep them at least a ½ inch thick. But if you are going to use an interlock system or something that you're going to attach to the bottom, you're going to need to cut them down to about a ¼ inch thick. The problem is, with the fence on the Proxxon, it's going to allow those pieces to move around. So you will need some kind of additional fence or wall that is high enough that you can rest your foam against. Once you have that in place and you have it lined up, make sure you lock down your fence or whatever tool that you're using so that you can guarantee that that wire stays at a perfectly 90-degree angle. I'm going to double check and make sure that I'm at about a quarter on the top and on the bottom so that I don't end up with some kind of angled cut. Once you have that aligned, again, put a little bit of pressure on that fence. Change your setting to about 5. You want this wire to be very, very hot so that it doesn't wave as it goes through the project. And then just rip a clean line. You'll be able to see that you now have a matched set of tiles that are approximately a ¼ inch thick. Hey, good news here. You just doubled your productivity. Now here's from a different view of what you can see where I'm ripping through those 3x3 tiles. Finally, for those people that really want to use grid squares in their projects, here's how you're going to do it. Set your depth to about 1 inch. And then what you want to do is turn your Proxxon back down to about 4 in temperature and rotate your tile until you burn and score in just a little bit of your grid square checkering in there. Now, because a Proxxon can be used as a hot wire scroll saw, that's how we're going to go through and cut the pieces that we need. Now I'm going to cut a end wall here, at least the way that I'm going to operate my system. And if you notice on both edges, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start just inside and I'm going to continue to cut a small wavy line that will represent my wall. But just before I get to the end of that cut, I'm going to come back out so I can keep the two sides exactly at 3 inches so they line up with my other tile. Now to create a hallway, I'm going to do the exact same process, but I'm going to do it on opposite sides of each other. That way I create a visual look where I have these wavy lines that I'm using to represent my walls on both sides. Again, make sure that you keep both sides completely squared off here and you don't cut over the edge so that you can keep a perfectly 3-inch side to line up with your other tiles. Now the last piece that you're going to make are your right angle turns. So what we have to do is we have to go from one corner to the opposite corner. And again, because I'm using wavy lines to represent my walls, I need to be very careful and start exactly on one corner, create my wavy line pattern, and then come out exactly on the other corner. Again, I've just doubled my productivity because I took one square that I cut that was already marked up, and I now have two right angles. So let's talk about texturing. What I did in my tile system, I'll point back to my basics video when I talked about texturing. This is a Green Stuff World's bricks rolling texture pin. It's meant for clay, and it does put just a subtle texture onto the foam itself. However, what I found is I liked the way that it applied this texture and gave me a very subdued pattern, but I didn't think it gave me a convincing pattern for what would be just generic rock and granite. Because of that, you could always choose at this point to use foil. It does work, and it's easy to get into tighter spaces with it. However, when you're doing a large batch of these tiles, I just went ahead and super glued some small rocks onto a rod, and I can quickly roll this texture out onto a project tile very, very quickly, and you can see how well it took that texture. That's going to give that paint and wash later on something to really grab into. So I'm going to quickly go through texturing these pieces. One thing I do want to point out is, no matter which side that I am looking at here, I am not going to put any texture or any additional carving on those sides. And the reason is, once I start to use this tile system and I start putting paint on them, I need to make sure that they line up. And as we move into our D&D content this fall, you're going to get a chance to see all of the terrain that I create specifically for our table.